So I actually want to start with the source page, and I want to start with a basic kind of understanding of the role of the Mishkan at the core of the Machane, as it's set out in Bamidbar, Naso, Baloscha, really all the way back from Shmos, but certainly here, there's no question that the Oel Moed, the tent of meeting, the Mishkan, sits at the center of the Mishkan, center of the camp. From the very beginning of the census, in Perek Bet and Bamidbar, Ishal Diglo Botot Lafetovotam, the families, the households, the tribes are set up by the Degel, the banner. We'll talk about what that banner is. Misaviv La'ol Moed Yachanu. Around the camp, the tent of meeting. It's central to the nature of this structure that the Ohel Moed is in the middle. And then each of the camps, each of the banners and the tribes of Israel, the sub tribes of Levi in Parshat Naso, are structured around this camp structure called the Or Moed. Similarly, at the end of Perek Bet, V'Levim Lo Hotmaktu, in the original census of last week's parsha, the Levim were not included, whereas they have a separate role. And this is how they were set out. That's how they camped. That's how they traveled. And the travel will take us to the parallel piece of this discussion, which is Bamidbar Perek Yud, I believe. Okay, in next week's parasha, Balos, as I said, this is kind of a straddling of 3 weeks. Moshe is told to make chatzatzot, gather the people together, the role of the Or Moed. We'll talk about that in a second. And then they begin to travel. The 20th of Iyar, the Mishkan, the Anan lifts up, and they begin to travel. And I'll show you the comparison in a moment, but the Machane here is repeated. The camp of Yehuda goes first, the banner, with their Nasi, Nachshon ben Aminadav, the head of the tribe, and with him the tribes of Yisachar and the tribes of Zvulun. Al Tzva b'nei Yisachar b'nei Zvulun. I'm actually going to do one little thing, if you don't mind. Make it easier to see. Okay. B'nei Yisachar, Zvulun. And then, V'hu the Mishkan. Then the Mishkan will be taken apart. And the subtribe of Gershon and Merari were carrying the various pieces of the Mishkan, as described in this week's parsha. And then Machane Reuven, and together with Machane Reuven and the Nasi of Reuven, you have the tribes of Shimon and the tribes of Gad and their Nisiim, and then V'Nasua Ke'atim, and then Kahat in the middle. And they would take down they would carry the next part of the Mishkan. V'Nasad Dagomachane ben Ephraim with Menashe and Binyamin, and then Dagomachane ben Dan together with Asher and Naphtali. And this is, so the whole structure of the camp of Israel revolves around essentially 3 parameters. Which tribe was on which side of the Mishkan? Which subtribe of Levi was on which side of the Mishkan? Which Nasi led which tribe? Which were the Nasiim from Bamidbar, they repeated in Balos, they repeated again in Naso, and where the Mishkan moves with the camp and is set up at the camp. And more or less, that's the structure from beginning to end. There's a couple of little additional pieces that I mentioned in terms of Parshat Nazir and Parshat and other things, but more or less, that's the structure of the camp as it's set out. And this is reflected also in the beginning of Perek Yud in one of the primary roles of the Mishkan, which is that as the people, Moshe is instructed right before they begin to travel in Perek Yud, Moshe is told to make these trumpets of silver, that will be used to call the congregation together, ulamasa tamachanot, and to travel. V'tak'u behem, you will blow them. V'noadu elecha kol ha'eda el petach ol moed. So you will use them for all of the congregation to meet together and for you to call them to meet at the entrance of the Or Moed. I want to draw your attention to this phrase particularly because it's one of the references to why the Mishkan is called an Ohel Moed, because the word Moed means to meet. So from this reference, it would seem that the reason why the Mishkan is called an Ohel Moed is because No'adu Elecha Kol Eda. It was at the center of the camp of Israel, and all of Israel would gather at its entrance if they had instructions, if they needed to travel, if they would. The Ohel Moed served as a kind of social, structural connection to all the tribes of Israel, united them together. And in Parshat Bamidbar, and in Sefer Bamidbar, that's where the role of the Mishkan is defined. V'noadu elecha, and the siyim, or tkatem, where you travel, etc. That stands in somewhat of a contrast to the very same role of the Ohel Moed as it's described in Sefer Shemot and Sefer Vayikra. Because in Sefer Shemot we find a very similar phrase, except that the meeting of the Ohel Moed is not between Moshe or the Melech and the people of Israel, but between God and the people of Israel, or between God and the prophet or the Navi. In Shemot Perek Chav Hey, we find the very beginning of the structure of the building of the Mishkan. The first kli is the Aron. V'na'adati lechasham, I will meet you there. V'dibarti itchami ala kaparat, and speak to you from upon the kaparat. Meaning, if I asked you what was the purpose of the Ohel Moed, it has two. It is the purpose of, it's called a meeting tent because God meets man there. It's a meeting between the finite and the infinite. V'no'adati lechasham, Moed. And it's a gathering of the people of Israel. V'no'adu elecha kol ha'edah. In other words, there's a religious component of the Mishkan, which is to be the avodah, the place of the Kohanim, the place of, and there's a societal role that the Mishkan plays as the center of the camp of the army of Israel as it marched forward through the Midbar. V'no'adu elecha kol ha'edah. And that distinction between the two roles of the Mishkan continues to play out throughout Sefer Shemot Vayikra and Sefer Bamidbar. For example, at the central dedication of the Mishkan in Vayikra, Shemot described in Shemot and then performed in Vayikra, fulfilled in Vayikra, the dedication ceremony of the Mishkan was an inauguration ceremony for Aaron and his sons, Mashmini famously. And in that moment, Vayomer Moshe Zeh Davar Asher Tzivah Hashem, the climax of that moment was V'yera Elechem Kvod Hashem. The climax of that entire process of building the Mishkan and of structuring the Mishkan and the avodah and the dedication was so that there should be a revealed presence of God. V'shachanti b'tocham v'no'adati l'chashem. I will meet you there. It plays that bridge between the finite and the infinite. In Bamidbar, what's the central climax? What do we achieve after the dedication of the Nisiim in this week's parsha and the structure in the beginning of the camp moving in Bamidbar in Perek Yud in next week's parsha? What's the climax of that whole process? 2 psukim at the end of Perek Yud. The last 2 psukim of Perek Yud. Here, Vahi b'nesoah ha'aron, as the Aron began to travel. In Vayikra, it's stationary. It's about the avodah. In Bamidbar, it's moving because it's not about just the avodah. Now it plays a role to be God accompanying Israel as they begin their move forward to the land of Israel. And so famously 2 psukim, as the ark moved, Moshe proclaimed, Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu evecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. God, scatter your enemies, and those who would fight, who would be your enemy, who hate you, would flee. Uvinuchoyomar, as the ark would rest and the camp would come back and reestablish itself, Shuva Hashem livavot afei Yisrael. I'm not so crazy about this translation. I translated it a little differently. I translated it as when it rested, Moshe would say, return them, referring to the army of Israel, the forces, the troops of Israel, the myriads of thousands of Israel, the Pekudah, the Dgalim, the banners, return them safely to their homes. This is a battle cry. This is a march to war. This is a march to the land of Israel through the desert, in which they're going to have to fight their enemies. And so, Vayibin saw Aaron, Moshe says, God scatter your enemies. And as the ark came back to camp, and meaning as the camp would reestablish itself, the battle was over, the march of the army was over, Uvenuchoyomar, Shuva Hashem, returned the myriads and thousands of Israel safely to their homes. Shuva Hashem, Israel. I'm sure you're famously familiar with the fact that there's these two psukim are kind of isolated with upside down nuns in the Sefer Torah. They kind of bracketed from the rest of the Sefer. They kind of serve they're literally written in the Torah scroll with these upside down nuns to like brackets. And the Gemara offers two explanations as to why that is so. The first is because it's out of place, according to one opinion. But the second explanation, which I think is much more powerful, is that Rabbi Omer, Elom and Hashem, was El Mipnei Sefer Chashuv Hu Bifnei Atzmo. These two psukim serve as a kind of an independent book. And that's why they're bracketed off from the rest of Sefer Bamidbar. Why are they bracketed off? Because this is the essence, the core, the message of the whole Sefer. Explains Rashi, actually, that doesn't explain it here. But the idea is that it kind of defines the essence of what this whole first 10 chapters of Sefer Bamidbar was all about, setting up the camp and beginning the journey to the land of Israel. It's a famous machloket, Rashi and other Mefarshim, Ramban, Rashbam. Why is it necessary to take a census? Why do we have this constant reference to a census? They're counted in Perek Aleph by tribe, and the list of all the Nesiim for each tribe. Then they're counted again. They're counted by Degel in chapter 2, which tribes are together with which other tribes and which banner, and again the list of the Nesiim. And then we have in this week's parasha the dedication of the Nesiim, and each tribe. Parak Zion, this week's parasha, Yom Klot Moshe Lakim et Mishkan. They dedicate, they build it all together, they put the Mishkan together, they put the whole camp together. And then, unlike in Vayikra, where the Kohanim stepped forward to dedicate the Mikdash, the Mishkan, here the Nesiim, who had each tribe, because it's tribe-centered. The Mishkan sits at the center of the camp of Israel. It's not an isolated, separate, transcendent place. It's a structural, integral part of the camp of Israel. And so it is the Nesiim who lead that dedication, and they lead with oxen. They lead with travel materials, because we're building towards the ability for the Mishkan to travel and for the tribes of Israel to travel. Why do they need to travel? So that whole process is defined at the end of chapter 10, where it says, sorry for jumping around a little bit, but it kind of just pulled the pieces together. And this is the climax. It's about traveling to the land of Israel via Futsu Evacha, and going to war, to fight, to regain the foothold in the land of Israel. And so that's exactly what the Ramban and Rashbam says, that the purpose of this mifkad, this Kol Pekudei Bnei Yisrael, Koyotzei Tzava B'Yisrael, those who go to war, is that's the nature of how you go to war. Kederach Shamachut Oseh before the milchama. Atayu mizumanim likanes laaretz. They were ready to go into the land. V'lachein b'milchama imacheh ha'emorei. And that's why it says that as they begin to go to war, they pass to the land of the Amorites. They say, we're going to the place that God has commanded us. And Moshe and the Nesiim had to know how to divide the tzava, chalutzei tzava ha'milchama. They needed to know the numbers in each shevet. They needed to know the numbers in each banner. Zetam kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael. That's what the army of Israel looked like. Rashbam similarly explains, Lefi she'me'ata tzrichim lalechat la'eretz Yisrael uvnei asrim yim letzei b'tzava. They're 20 years old. The census is from the age of 20 because they have to go to a war, and that's the age of Chumash. And that's the whole beginning of Sefer Bamidbar. Shift Mishkan from this Kohen-centric, Avoda-centric role, which was true when the Mishkan sat, when the Mishkan was encamped, when the Anan was on the Mishkan. But when they traveled, when they went to war, when they took the Aron, went into battle with them, now the Mishkan is taken apart, the Aron, the cloud goes with them, and at the center is the banner, the Degel, the tribes of Israel, and the Nesiim who led each tribe. And that's the structure of the beginning half of Sefer Bamidbar, up until they begin to travel. From next week's parsha, after they begin to travel, things get derailed. They start to get into trouble. Not our subject for now. Mizrat Hashem, one day we'll have a chance to explore those pieces of the puzzle. But for now, the purpose of this first half of the discussion, or third, was to understand the difference of the role of the Mishkan in Bamidbar versus the Mishkan in travel versus the Mishkan in stationary, the role of the two roles of the Ol Moed, God and man, leader and tribes, and the fact that this is all in preparation for their travel as an army, and the need to set the banners of Israel as a kind of the armies of Israel as they would begin the march to the land of Israel. Okay. Having said that, I want to go back to these two chapters, chapter 2 in last week's parsha, chapter 10 in next week's parsha, and try to understand, is there a deeper meaning to the way in which the tribes are set out, what I call the banner structure, the Degalim. There's much discussion about the Degalim, the role that the Degel play, the fact that Israel saw the Malachim, the angels set up by banners, and they desired them, and so God acquiesced and he gave them banners, whatever that means. There is this central motif of the Degel that permeates this whole story. And when the camp is first set out, it's set out in these groups of tribes called a Degel. And as they begin to travel in Perek Yud, next week's parsha, that similarly, the same structure is repeated. And my question is there a deeper meaning to how the tribes of Israel are laid out? And does that have an impact later on for how they settle in the land of Israel? So, of course, there are 12 tribes, and there are 4 sides to a building. That's not hard math to figure out. And so I'm going to jump a little bit. At the end of the day, your camp is going to look, where is it? Somewhat like this. Here's your Ol Moed in the middle, and I have 4 camps of 3 tribes on each side of the Mishkan. That's not hard to do. If you had given a square structure or a rectangular structure and said, okay, I have 12 tribes, divide them equally around the Mishkan, so you'd put 3 on each side. By and of itself, that's not a surprise. The problem is that I have 12 tribes, but they're not naturally divided into 4 groups, because the tribes come from 4 mothers, 1 father, 4 mothers, but we really, Leah and Rachel are the Imahot, Zilpah and Bilhah are the Shfachot, they're attached to them, but 6 of those tribes were born to Leah, 2, Yosef and Binyamin, were born to Rachel, 2 were born to Zilpah, and 2 were born to Bilhah, which means that I need to do some creative dividing in order to divide these 12 into 4 groups of 3. Everybody understand the problem? The challenge as we play it, as we unfold. So let's just go through the text for a second. Text says as follows, and I'm doing it here without the translation. I'll translate as we go. If you want, you can follow with the text that has the translation. I'm more interested in the structure, which tribes are where, and so I've put that into this structure. So they're color-coded. The banner of Yehuda in this, these are arbitrary colors. These have nothing to do with the colors of the banners themselves. The banner of Judah is in blue, Reuven is in red, Ephraim is in green, Dan is in purple. Hachanim kedma mizracha. The camp, the Degel that was on the east side of the Mishkan, was the Degel of Yehuda, together with the tribes of Yisachar and Zevulun. And again, it mentions the Nasiim, the heads of each tribe, because at the center of Sefer Bamidbar, the Nasi plays a much larger role than the Kohen does, that we finished talking about a few moments ago. So the head of each tribe, the tribes that are in Degel Machane Yehuda are Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun. Degel Machane Reuven, Temana, south is the camp of Reuven, and together with the camp of Reuven, you have the camp of Shimon and Gad. I'm not even talking about the numbers. The numbers are a whole different parsha. That's in Perek Aleph. For now, it's not. I'm just looking at who's where. And then in the middle, you have Nasa Or Moed Machane Leviim. The Leviim and the Oha Moed, the Machane Shechina, was in the middle. Then you have Degel Machane Ephraim, the banner of Ephraim, Yama, west, together with the tribe of Menashe and the tribe of Benjamin. And then you have the Degel of Machane Dan in the north, together with Asher and Naphtali. When they actually begin to travel in Perek Yud, you have a repeat of exactly the same structure, with the addition of the breakdown of the Mishkan and the Nevi and the Nasi and the Leviim, described in this week's parsha, carrying the various pieces of the Mishkan. So you have Degel Machane Bnei Yehuda Barishona, with the Degel of Yehuda first, together with led by their Nasi, Nachshon ben Aminadav, and with him Al Tzva Mate Bnei Yisachar and Zvulun. Then the Mishkan was deconstructed. Then you have Degel Machane Reuven with Shimon and Gad. Then the Katim would carry the Kalim of the Mishkan itself, the Aron, the Mizbeach, the Shulchan, etc. And then you have Bnei Ephraim, together with Menashe and Benjamin, and Dan, together with Asher and Naphtali. And the structure is exactly the same as it appears in Perek Bet of Parshat Bamidbar, no different. So I want to try to understand this structure a little bit. How do we go from 12 tribes divided by their mothers to 3 camps and how they are set up? So first of all, let's talk about the fact that Bnei Leah, there are 6 children of Leah, and therefore logically there should be 2 groups of Dgalim of Bnei Leah. That makes sense, except for one problem, which is that I can't simply take 6 children and divide them into 2 groups and get 2 groups of 3, because somebody pipe in. Because
Levi.
Because Levi disrupts the count. Levi was not included in the Degel structure. Levi is a separate camp. They're sitting in here in the camp of the Or Moed. So Levi can't be put. Normally it would be Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And that would make sense. Except that you can't do that. You took Levi out. Now here's the secret to understanding the 12 tribes in Tanakh. And this is true everywhere in Tanakh. There are no exceptions. There is never 13 tribes. No place in Tanakh, everywhere where the tribes are listed, there are only ever 12. If Levi is listed amongst the tribes, Yosef is listed as a single tribe. If Levi is not listed amongst the tribes, then Yosef is split into Ephraim and Menashe. I'll show you an example of that. I'll come back to this page in a second. But let me show you this one example, and it's not on the source page, so I apologize. At the very end of Yechezkel, Yechezkel describes the Sha'arim, the gates of the city of Yerushalayim, and he says around the city of Yerushalayim there are 4 sides, and there will be 3 gates on each side named by the tribes of Israel. Okay? And I just pulled this up. It's Yechezkel Memchet. But you can see the names of the Shmot Shiftei Yisrael on each side. So Tzafon in the north is the tribe, the gate of Reuven, Shar Yehuda, Shar Levi. East, there are 3 gates, Shar Yosef, Shar Binyamin, Shar Dan. And the rest of them, Shimon, Yisachar, and Zvulun, and then Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. But you see right away, the moment I include a gate for Levi, what did I do to Ephraim and Menashe? I recombined them into Shar Yosef. You can never have 13 tribes. There are 12 tribes. If Levi is included for whatever reason, Yosef is 1. If Levi is not included, then Yosef got a double portion, and his tribal territory gets split to Ephraim and Menashe. We're good on that front? So here I take out Levi. So now I am Reuven Shimon. Levi belongs here, but he's not there. We'll divide Yosef into Ephraim and Manasseh in a moment. So what do I do with this gap? So to the children of Leah is annexed the tribe of Gad. Why Gad? Because Zilpah was the shifcha of Leah. She was the maidservant of Leah. So the assumption is that Rachel and Leah raised and adopted the children of the shfachot as part of their families. Therefore, it makes sense that the Bechor of Zilpah is included to fill in the missing tribe here. So Reuven, Shimon, and Gad becomes a single degel. Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun becomes a single degel. The order is somewhat interesting. In chapter 1 of Bamidbar, Reuven is first. In chapter 2 of Bamidbar, Yehuda is first. That I'm not going to spend time on for now. So those are the children of Leah. Levi comes out, and Gad, Bechor of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, comes in to fill that gap. Bnei Rachel is easy. Yosef has two tribes, two children, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Binyamin. So I have two children, but I have three Dgalim because again, Yaakov blesses Rachel, divides Yosef, and divides his tribe into two. The other thing Yaakov did, which is interesting, is that he, if you remember the famous Sikel et Yadav, he switched his hands, meaning he placed Ephraim above Manasseh. That means that the bearer of the degel is identified not as Degel Machane Manasseh, but Degel Machane Ephraim, because he was the one who was identified to be the leader of the children of Yosef. You follow what's going on? Which we're pulling from the brachos of Yaakov, and later on in the second we'll pull from the brachos of Moshe, to see the role of the Degalim. There are consistent patterns here throughout Tanakh. From Breshit and from the rest of Chumash, Yosef is divided into Ephraim and Manasseh, but Ephraim leads the Degel. And then, of course, Binyamin is added. That leaves in the fourth side the remaining Bnei Hashfachot, namely Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Dan first because he carries the banner because he's the Bechor of Bilhah. The Bechor of Zilpah was already included in Degel Machane Reuven. So Dan is the bearer of the Degel, and Asher and Naphtali are the remaining Bnei Hashfachot, and they're included in this last group. And so this structure of the Imahot, as it translates into the division by the banners, ends up with the following four groups: Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun on the east, Reuven, Shimon, and Gad in the south, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Binyamin in the west, and Dan, Asher, and Naphtali in the north. Does that help understand how this banner structure is put together? It's not arbitrary. There's even a medrash that says that the entire setup of the tribes was set out by Yaakov on his deathbed, and he kind of identified which tribes would go where. That's a medrash that I think has a different source. I think there's a pshat to that medrash. I think it's actually linked more to his brachos to the children in terms of the, rather than the location around his deathbed. I think it had to do with the brachos that he gave his children, because one of the big questions in the brachos of Yaakov, as well as the brachos of Moshe, is what were they doing? What was Yaakov trying to accomplish when he blessed his children? And the simplest explanation is that he was identifying in broad strokes what part of the land of Israel each tribe would inherit. In other words, what would be the area, the nachala of Shevet Yisachar and Zvulun, or Asher and Naphtali, or Gad, or right? Where would they be physically? I'll give you an example. Yaakov calls his children over, and he starts to identify their roles and the blessings. This is Breshit Parak Memtet, the last parak of Reuven. He starts with Reuven, who is firstborn, but Reuven problematic is his firstborn because of the story of Reuven and Bilhah, and so he kind of challenges Reuven, criticizes Reuven, and therefore it's understood that he's essentially taking away the double portion, the Bechor role of Reuven, and he gave that to Ephraim and Menashe. Reuven v'Shimon yiyuli. Ephraim and Menashe would be the double portion. Another observation: Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi, Yaakov was very upset with them because of the story of Shechem, and so he is afraid of their being united in one place. Shimon v'Levi Achim, klei chamas mechoratehem. They're weapons of violence. Therefore, bikahalam al techat kvodi. Don't bring them together. Don't unite them. Don't bring them into one unified group, which is understood to mean that he scattered them. He scattered them over Israel. Afitzem b'Yisrael. Chalkem b'Yakov, afitzem b'Yisrael. I will divide them. How does he divide Reuven and Levi? So Levi's easy. Levi redeems themselves, in a sense, after Chet Egel. And so Levi is given a, where's it? Sorry. Right? Levi is scattered in the tent, in the Degel. He's scattered throughout the various sides of the Mishkan. But in the land of Israel itself, and I've given you a map of where each tribe was in the land of Israel, you'll notice that there's no Shevet Levi in the list of the tribes, just as there's no Degel of Levi. Where did Levi live? What part of the country did Levi live in? Everywhere. Is they were given individual cities throughout the land. Well, that's what Yaakov said. I'll divide them for different reasons. Shimon is more complicated. Shimon had a nachla, it would seem, and yet Yaakov tries to scatter them or separate them. Levi redeems themselves. Shimon, on the contrary, does something even worse. What does Shimon do? If you remember the story of Baal Peor, what was the story of Baal Peor? After Parshat Chukah, at the end of Parshat Chukah, end of Parshat Balak, Shimon was the one who okay, this gets a little bit trickier. Remember the story of Baal Peor? They're in the tribe of, they're sitting in Ever Yarden, and they get seduced by the daughters of Midian in the area of Midian or of Moab, and they end up having, and 30,000 of them die in a plague. Remember that?
Zimri ben Salu.
Excuse me?
With Zimri ben Salu.
With Zimri ben Salu, correct. That whole story. So this isn't in the text, and Zimri was the was from Shevet Shimon. This isn't in the text, but it's pretty clear. And it's referenced in Rashi that if you remember the census in Bamidbar, since we're talking about numbers, in the beginning of Bamidbar, the tribe of Shimon is Tish'a v'chamishim elef, 59,000 Shimonites. It's a big tribe. In the aftermath of Parshat Balak and the events of Baal Peor, when I go to the census in Parshat Pinchas, they again count the children of Israel in Parshat Pinchas, and the tribe of Shimon is, anybody know the number? Shnayim ve'esrim elef, 22,000. Shevet Shimon goes from 59,000 to 22,000. They're decimated. And the mystery is why. And so the Mefarshim come to a consensus that it must be that they were decimated because, let's see if it's here in Rashi, if I can find it quickly. Not here in this pasuk. But the simplest explanation is that the entire tribe of Shimon was the tribe that was guilty of the chet of Baal Peor. It wasn't spread amongst all the tribes. It was specific to the tribe of Shimon. And so the 30,000 who died were the 30,000 of Shevet Shimon. That would explain another anomaly in Shevet Shimon, which is that when Yaakov comes to bless Bnei Israel in Parshat Bracha, Asher Barach Moshe, Moshe also identifies the tribes of Israel and he gives them blessings, and he identifies where each tribe is going to be in the land of Israel and what their role will be, etc. We'll explore that in a moment as well. What is Moshe's bracha to Shimon? Okay, let's go through it for a second. This is in Vizot Liuda, Levi, Benjamin, Yosef. Right, Levi is mentioned, so Yosef is one. Zvulun, Gad, Yisachar, Asher, Dan, Naphtali. What's Yaakov's bracha? What's Moshe's bracha to Shimon? Anybody want to guess?
There is none, but some say it's included in Yehuda's bracha.
Well, we'll get to Yehuda's bracha in a second. There is none. He's including Yehuda's land. That's not necessarily because he's including Yehuda's bracha. There is no bracha to Shimon. Why is there no bracha to Shimon? Because Shimon lost their nachala. Moshe's bracha, like Yaakov's bracha, was about which tribes would live in the land of Israel where. Who would be on the coast and who would be in the land and who would be north and what would be the nature of their land and what would be the produce of each land, etc. So, right? This is the nature of the bequeathing. The one thing they have in the last will and testament, you bequeath, you give your wealth to your children. Yaakov didn't have any wealth. He had the land of Israel. He had a promise of the land of Israel. Moshe had the promise of the land of Israel. The brachos are a way of dividing the tribes in their land. There's no bracha to Shimon because Shimon lost their nachala. If you look at the degel, let's go back to the degel for a second. Degel machane Reuven. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. Correct? That's a degel. We're gonna do in the next 15 minutes. So I want to show you how the galim as they marched through the desert was essentially a parallel to how the tribes would be laid out in the land of Israel. Well, Reuven, Shimon, and Gad is a degel, but Shimon is not part of the conversation between Reuven, Gad, and Moshe when they come to divide the land east of the Yarden. That conversation is between Reuven and Gad. Where is Shimon? So it doesn't say, but it's a reasonable assumption that the land of Israel was divided by tribes much like the Galim were in groups. And we'll see that in a second. So Reuven, Shimon, and Gad most likely would have been a degel together, but Shimon lost their nachla because of both the bracha of Yaakov and the bracha of Moshe. And so in the end, in Sefer Yoshua, and beginning of Sefer Shoftim, when Yehuda goes to fight in the south, Shimon is given 5 cities inside the tribal territory of Judah. That's why some say it's included in the bracha. There's no bracha to Shimon. It was a punishment to Shimon. It was a critique of Shimon. He was essentially lost his nachla after the story of Baal Peor. But there's still 22,000 left. So they're given a handful, like Levium, they're given a handful of cities inside the tribal territory of Judah, which is why initially they're down here in the south. Many years later, they migrate north. But that begins the conversation that the Galim aren't just about how they travel through the desert, they're also about how the land of Israel is divided. And here we get into a fascinating look at what the land of Israel looks like and how the anticipation of the tribes was that this bracha to them, this degel layout, would more or less set in place how they would settle in the land of Israel. There are some exceptions. We'll see what those exceptions are. But if we start with Degel Machane Reuven, which is Reuven, Gad, and Shimon was removed, so Degel Machane Reuven is here on the east side of the Yarden. Now, you'll tell me there's another tribe on the east side of the Yarden also, namely Menashe. But if you remember a shir I gave a couple of years ago, and came across it in Yeshua as well, Menashe is also not part of the initial conversation between Moshe, Reuven, and Gad. Reuven and Gad come because they want the area of Sichon, which is between the Arnon River and the Yabok. Menashe is annexed in the north for a different reason altogether, most likely because there have been tribe families of Shevet Menashe living in the area of Chavot Yair and the Gilad all the way from the days of Ephraim and Divrei Hayamim. That was a shir we just had in Sefer Yeshua. So they're there naturally. Reuven and Gad asked to be there. Fine. What are the other Degalim that we have? So let's look at Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin. If Reuven, Shimon, and Gad should have been on the east side of the Yarden, I'd have to mirror image, because once that request came, you have to kind of turn this picture on a mirror image on its side. Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin. Where are Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin in the land of Israel? Well, Ephraim is here, just north of Binyamin, from Beit El north. And then north of Ephraim, I have Menashe. So I have Binyamin here, Ephraim here, and Menashe here. So more or less, I have the tribal group, the Degel, called Degel Machane Ephraim, as Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin here together contiguously in the center of the land of Israel, much as I have Reuven and Gad on the east side of the Yarden, Shimon removed from the conversation. Let's talk about a third Degel of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Here's something very odd happens. Asher and Naphtali are here in the north, more or less the upper Galilee and into what is today Lebanon. It's the tribal territory of Asher and Naphtali. That's one part of the banner, but Dan is, let's, one second. No, I don't want to take that part. Let's do this. Let's go back to Breshit Mem Tet for a moment, and let's look at Dan. Shevet Dan is complicated. Dan Yadina Mok Yachat Shiftei Israel. Dan will avenge his people like one of the tribes of Israel. Yehi Dan Nachash Alederech Shifon Alayodach Hanoshech Yikfesus V'Yipol Rechavo Achvor. Let Dan be like a serpent, like a viper on the path, who bites the horse's heel and the rider falls backwards. Lishuatcha kiviti Hashem. I pray for your victory. I pray for your salvation. What's happening here? Who is the Rash? And most of the Mepharshim identify the brachos based on what happens to in the future. Who is the most famous leader from the tribe of Dan? Shimshon. What's going on in this bracha? What's going on in this bracha is very simple when you look at a map. Yaakov places Dan on the coast here. What is today known as the area called modern Israel. What is this area known as?
Gush Dan.
Tel Aviv, Petach Tikva, etc. Gush Dan. Why is it called Gush Dan? Because it's the Nachal of Shevet Dan. Now, the problem is, amongst all the tribes of Israel, and this map is a very good map. This is a map. The orange is the end of Sefer Yeshua, the Israelite settlement in Israel. The yellow is more or less the Canaanite hold where we were unable to conquer. Dan, amongst all the tribes of Israel, is the only tribe who is given tribal territory that is entirely plains, coast, flatland. He has no foothold in the mountains whatsoever. Every other tribe has some foothold in the mountain, even if they're in the valley at some point, and therefore is able to settle somewhere, even if they can't conquer the Canaanites. Shevet Dan is a problem. they settling here, but they can't get a foothold here because the Canaanites have the upper hand when it comes to the settlement of the area that is Canaanite, Plishtaim, any army that uses chariots and horses. So what's Yaakov's bracha to Dan? That he should learn to fight the chariot and the horse by scaring the horse. And how does a foot soldier manage to take down a chariot? By disabling the motor. The motor is the horse. So that doesn't work. It works for a time, but it doesn't work completely. It's kind of like Shimshon type of operation. So what does Moshe do? Moshe, who recognizes that Dan's foothold in the land of Israel is going to be complicated, says to Shevet Dan, L'dan Amar, Dan gur aryeh yizanek min ha-Bashan. He leaps out of the Bashan. What is the Bashan? Har Bashan is the Golan Heights. So Moshe takes the tribe of Dan, and he says, if you can't get a foothold on the coast, I'll give you an area in the north. That's today known as Har Chamon. Tel Dan, the Banyas, if you've been there. So you see already the pattern in the brachos, both of Moshe and of Yaakov, is to kind of identify the tribes and where they'll be. But now by putting Dan in the north, what have I done here? I have a contiguous territory of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, which is a banner, Degel Machane Dan. Right? That's exactly the Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So they're in the north side of the Ol Moed, and they're in the north side of the country in a contiguous fashion. The story of Pesamicha, they migrate north, they settle in the area of Vaish. Right? That's all in this area here. Does everybody see what I'm trying to do? Is to trace the Degel and the division of the Degel into how the tribes are laid out in the land of Israel. It might be easier actually to see it on this map. This map is from alatorah.org. You kind of can see Reuven and Gad are over here, Judah together with parts of Shimon in the south, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali are here in the north, and Binyamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh are here in the center. And so the Degalim, more or less, we'll come to the last Degel I haven't gotten to yet, which is Yehuda. More or less, the Degalim are laid out in accordance with the banners traveling through the desert. When they come to the land of Israel, they will remain more or less contiguous groups of tribes connected to each other, living next to each other, as they settle in their territory in the land of Israel. Degel Machane, Reuven, Gad, Shimon. Shimon is removed. Degel Machane Dan, Asher, and Naphtali in the north. Degel Machane Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin in the center. Which leaves us with one final group, namely Yehuda. Yehuda is a little complicated because when you look at the tribal territory of Yehuda, Yehuda is everything south of Yerushalayim is Yehuda. Where are Yisachar and Zvulun? Yisachar and Zvulun are here in the north, in the more or less the area of the lower Galilee and Emek Yisrael, the Jezreel Valley. And you can look at the brachas, if you want, you can go through the exercise of looking at the brachas that Yaakov and Moshe give to Yisachar and Zvulun. You can see Yisachar and Zvulun are here in this territory. Yisachar Chamar Garem, Yisachar is described as an ox stubbornly holding on to the territory of Emek Yisrael, a very central role, central place of territory in the land of Israel. Why are Judah, Yisachar, and Zvulun separated? They're the only Degel that are separated. Judah in the south, Yisachar, Zvulun in the north. And I don't have a concrete explanation for that unique phenomenon. I have a theory. Assuming I need to put Yisachar and Zvulun here for reasons that are characteristic to Yisachar and Zvulun, they should hold on to Emek Yisrael, etc. Why didn't I put Judah there? Why is Judah in the south? So there's two suggestions to this anomaly. One is that Judah is always separate from the rest of the tribes of Israel. If you go through Sefer Yeshua, Sefer Shoftim, Sefer Shmuel, every time there's a mifkad, every time there's a census of the army, the numbers come back with the count of the number of soldiers in the rest of the tribes of Israel and the tribe of Judah separately. It's an anomaly. It's not clear why that's true. It's long before the kingdom is split. The kingdom will be split. Malchut Yudah versus Malchut Yisrael. Binyamin gets annexed to Judah. That's much later. But in the even earlier than that split of the kingdom after Shlomo, Judah is always counted separately as an army. Unclear why. Maybe there's some break or breach between Judah and the rest of the tribes of Israel. It's unclear. Judah is everything from Yerushalayim south, Yisachar Zvulun in the north. I have another theory as to why Judah is south. Even if I have to put Yisachar and Zvulun north, I need to put Judah south. Why? So let's, in the 5 minutes remaining, I hope this is clear. I might have gotten more complex than typical, but I've always been fascinated by the fact that we have 10 chapters in Bamidbar devoted to this degel structure. And then what happens to it? They come to the land of Israel and it disappears. The answer is no, it doesn't disappear. It's here. It's on this map. And that's what's so powerful. So let's talk about one additional anomaly. And then we'll come back to Yehuda, and that'll wrap it up. The Ol Moed is in the middle, clearly. Now, when they come to the land of Israel, the Ol Moed is not going to be in the middle of the tribes, because it's a tiny little blip. It's a piece of land. It's a city. It's the Mikdash or the Mishkan. Right now, we're talking about all the tribes of Israel spread over a whole land. So, what replaces the Ol Moed as the center of the camp of Israel in the layout of the tribes of the land? And here, I'll offer the following suggestion. I'm going to come back to the psukim here. Explain to me this pasuk. Levinyamin Amar, in Yaakov's bracha in Moshe's bracha to Binyamin. Levinyamin Amar, Yedid Hashem, the beloved of God, Yishkon lavetach alav, God will dwell, Shechen, Mishkan, Shechina, on Binyamin securely, Chofef alav kol hayom, hovering over him, covering him all day long, Uven ktefav shechen, dwelling between his shoulders. How do you understand that pasuk? The way most of the Mefarshim understand it is that Binyamin in this bracha is designated to be the tribe that would house the Shechina. The replacement of the Ol Moed would be the Shevet who would carry the Ol Moed in their midst, that would carry the Shechina in their midst. And so Shevet Binyamin is defined as the Shevet of the placement of the Shechina. Uven ktefav shechen, he will dwell between his shoulders. It's interesting about Shevet Binyamin, he's the only tribe which in Yeshua Perek Yirchet, when the tribes are divided and their territory is described, Binyamin is the only tribe that's described by hills, by mountain ranges, called Ketef. Ketef Yericho, Ketef Luz, Ketef Yevus, Ketef Arava, Ketef Bet Chogla, right? But these Ketefim ben Ktefav Shechen, that the Shechina rests on Shevet Binyamin between the shoulders of the hills that make up the tribal territory of Binyamin. And it would seem from Sefer Dvarim that the goal was that the Mishkan would be in Shevet Binyamin. Binyamin would be the Machana of the Shechina, the tribe that would house the Shechina. Now, if I go back to the map, we'll deal with the question of where the Mishkan is in a second. But if I put Binyamin in the middle, and I look at the tribes that are on all four sides of Binyamin, just the sides of Binyamin, if assuming Binyamin replaces the Ol Moed in function, what are the four tribes that surround Binyamin on each side? North of him is Ephraim. West of him is Dan, according to the original map. East of Binyamin is Ruvain, according to, right, on the Ever Yarden. And now south of Binyamin is Judah. And now I have an explanation as to why Judah is south of Binyamin, whereas Yisachar and Zvulun are north. Because the structure, the layout of Shevet Binyamin, if Binyamin becomes the tribe that represents the Shekhinah, so he's surrounded by the four Degalim. The banners are the banners of Yehuda, Reuven, Ephraim, and Dan. And those four tribes now surround the Shevet that represents the Shekhinah. There's only one problem with this theory. And that is that for 369 years, the Mishkan stood in Shiloh, which is in Shevet Ephraim. Every other place, by the way, the Mishkan stood after Shiloh, originally Gilgal is in Shevet Binyamin. Then after Shiloh falls, you have Kiryat Yearim, Nov, Gilgal. All those cities are in Binyamin. And then, of course, Yerushalayim, which was split between Yerushalayim and Binyamin, although the Gemara is very clear that the Mikdash itself was in the tribal territory of Binyamin. It was a small little piece of Yehuda that extended. But the tribe, the Yerushalayim itself was in the tribal territory. The Mikdash was in the tribal territory of Binyamin. What do I do with Shiloh? Shiloh is smack in the middle of Ephraim. So for that, you're going to have to come to my shir in Sefer Yoshua, because we'll deal with that extensively. But the short of it is that for all the initial 14 years of conquest and settlement, the Mishkan is in Shiloh. Every time a tribe goes to settle their land, they come running back to base camp, which is in Gilgal. And Yeshua is faced with a challenge. He can't get the tribes to move from the base camp in Gilgal because the Mishkan is there. So he's in Perek Yudchet, he breaks down the Mishkan and he moves it to Shiloh. Why Shiloh? Because Ephraim was already conquered. Ephraim was already taken. The tribal territory of Ephraim was settled. But Binyamin had not yet been settled. So he can't move the Mishkan to Binyamin. So he moves it to Shiloh in Ephraim. And that same Gemara in Zvachim says that the little island of space called Shiloh, even though it was in the tribal territory of Ephraim, it was kind of annexed. It kind of sat on this little island that we're going to call Shevet Binyamin. Right, so it gets complicated. We're going to deal with that when we get to Yoshua. But my point was that when you look at the banner of Degel Machane Yehuda, Degel Machane Binyamin, suddenly you realize that he's surrounded on all sides by the camps that bore the Degel, Yehuda, Dan, Ephraim, and Reuven, surrounding the tribe of the Shekhinah, which is Binyamin. So, in conclusion, and now we'll wrap it up. I'm going to stop sharing. When we look at the story of Sefer Bamidbar and they begin the journey from Har Sinai, the tribes are laid out not arbitrarily, which groups just by mothers, but in fact based on a map that Yaakov initiated, Moshe fine-tuned, a map of where the tribes of Israel would settle in the land of Israel. And so from the very beginning of their journey from Har Sinai, their trajectory is to get to the land of Israel. They're going to march in formation of the land of Israel, and they're going to settle in the land in this formation called the land of Israel. The Mishkan in the middle, the Machane of the Shekhinah in the middle, and all the Galim in the groups of tribes and the associations between the tribes, each in their area, in order to march us from the banners and the army to the settlement and the land and the territory of the land of Israel. That's what I got for you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Is 13 an unlucky number anywhere in?
No. There are 13 midot of Rachamim, there are 13 midot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there are 13 Ikari Emunah. It's not about being unlucky, it's about the number 12 in Sefer Breshit. All the very famous families have 12 children, the 12 tribes, Esav has 12 alufim, Yishmael has 12 children, Yaakov has 12 children. The shlemut of the tribes of Israel is 12. Why that's the case is a whole different shir. There's a piece by Rabbi Ben Nun who talks about the 12 references to the word lo in the Aseret HaDibrot, that even though we talk about 10 commandments, but there are 12 lavin. Number 12 has its own significance. But when it comes to the tribes, Yaakov splits Ephraim and Yaakov splits Yosef into Ephraim and Menashe, but he does so in such a way that we keep the integrity of the number 12. But not because 13 is unlucky. There are other aspects of 13.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I hope it was
Shalom.
helpful to
Shabbat
people.
shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Okay.
Thank you. Beautifully put together.
Thank you. Like I say, Rabbi Shulman is basically every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Not this week. He's otherwise occupied, but pretty much every Tuesday. Take a little bit of a break in the summer, and then please God continue next week. This year is 12 p.m. in St. Louis. Next year, please God, it'll be 8 p.m. from Israel. But on the East Coast, it will be 1 p.m. Whenever. So thank you, Yesh Koach, and okay, be well. My share, of course, tomorrow morning, 9:15 on the Siddur. Everybody welcome. And Rabbi Liebtag, Sunday morning next week, we'll have, of course, a full week. Hope everybody had a nice Yontif. Shavua is a short week this week, right? You turn around from Yontif to Shabbos. But, okay, very nice. We should hear good news. And everybody be well. Laila Tov.
You too. Thank you.